Hi everyone, we're back and we're continuing on with the making of our first loaf using our brand new sourdough starter. So if you, like me, put this in the refrigerator yesterday, take it out, weigh, what did we say yesterday, 246 or something. I changed the recipe that I'm going to use slightly, 243 grams of sourdough starter into a big bowl, and I'm going to put the measurements in the description, so I probably won't talk about them much more, but what I do want you to know is the process. So I weigh out the sourdough starter, I weigh out the flour that I'm using, the salt, and even the water, because I'm trying to be, pretty precise. This isn't rocket science, but it is science. So the first thing that we do is add all the water to the starter that's in the bowl, and then just stir that up, and I realize right as I say this that I forgot my wooden spoon, so I'm going to go grab that. We basically want to break up the starter so that it's easier to mix in with the flour when we add that in just a second. So you can see that it's pretty chunky and sticky, and that's gluten development, by the way, which is one of the things that we're hoping to see over the course of the next few hours. So Sophia and I have a busy day, so what we're going to do is often what I do. We'll start this, we'll go back to work or school or whatever it is we're doing, and then we'll continue on with the next part of the process. We could slow this down or speed it up a little bit, but for the most part, this is from the time that you've got a fed starter, when you start mixing, the fastest we could do this is probably 6 hours. So we're probably going to aim for something like 8, but we could put the dough into the refrigerator overnight for a day, maybe even 2 days, and then go from there. So with the salt, what I'm going to do is take out some of the flour from our recipe, and it's already weighed out, so I don't have to worry about how much I'm taking. I'm just taking out some, so that when it comes time to mix in the salt, it's a little easier. And you'll see in a few minutes, we're going to hold off on that. So right now, I'm just adding all of the flour, except what I took out to mix with the salt, and I'm just loosely stirring this together. And when this comes together, we're actually going to leave it for somewhere between a half hour and an hour, so that the sourdough starter has a chance to get a head start on fermenting the dough that we're making before we add the salt. So if you remember, one of the things that I said can kill your starter is salt. Well, we obviously need salt in our bread, unless we live in Tuscany where they don't actually salt their bread. Terrible, by the way. So we're just going to loosely mix this together, and then we're going to cover it. And in a half hour or an hour, or whatever's convenient for the two of us, we're going to come back. We're going to hand work in the remaining flour along with the salt, and then that's when our dough is really complete. And then when we start to do things like either knead it or slowly stretch and fold it, but we'll talk about those things individually. So this was the new starter. I'm going to take 5 minutes and do the same thing with the old starter, the one that I've had going for years, just to see how they're different, if at all. There might be slight differences in flavor, slight differences in how they raise the dough, but I think they're going to be very similar. So with that, we'll sign out just for a few minutes, and we'll see you soon. So it's been just about an hour since we mixed this, and as you can see, it's shiny in some places and dry looking in others, so I didn't do a very good job of mixing this, but that's fine. So what we're going to do now, I forgot to mix in the salt and the flour better, but we're just going to shake this over it, and we're going to hand mix this in. And you can just kind of stab some of the flour down into the wet dough, and this is a wet dough, by the way. And so one of the reasons that we like a super wet dough for this is that we want a lot of moisture inside the cast iron pot or the ceramic pot or Pyrex pot or whatever it is that you use. And that'll help it grow. And the other reason is that there are a whole bunch of ways that gluten can develop. And so we're looking at these partial proteins that need to line up to make gluten. And the reason that you need the gluten chains to line up is so that when the carbon dioxide that the yeast is giving off expands, it doesn't immediately break and escape. So by having that gluten development, we're enabling the air to stay within the bread, get a better rise, and there are a few ways to do that. One is that you can knead the bread. Two is that you can leave it hydrating. So a high amount of water will allow the gluten to develop all on its own. And then the third thing is time. So in Jim Leahy's first No-Knead bread video, which I will put a link to in the description of this, he puts the dough aside for like 17 hours or something, and that's a yeasted dough, but the same thing is happening. The gluten's developing just because it's a really wet dough and it's got plenty of time to develop. So we've mixed all of this in. So if you go a little closer just for a second, so I still have a bit of flour on the edge of the bowl, but as soon as that gets absorbed, this is going to get really sticky. And so you can see my fingers are a little sticky, but if I were to try to knead this right now, even just here in the bowl, it's going to get pretty messy really fast. So as soon as this feels like you can feel the salt in this, because I used a big chunky salt, but it's starting to get stickier by the second. So we're going to leave this again. We're going to come back in a half an hour. We're going to stretch and fold it right here in the bowl. But I'll show you that when we come back. Okay, we're back. It's been actually about 40 minutes since we initially mixed the dough, and so now what I'm going to do is show you two ways to stretch and fold this. So we've got two doughs. This one's based on the brand new starter, and this is the exact same proportions of dough with my older starter. So this flexible scraper can be used. You could do this with wet hands too, but that's going to change the hydration of the dough, and I'd rather not. I'm just going to stick this underneath and reach under and pull over a portion of it, and then I'm going to turn the bowl a tiny bit, and I'm just going to keep doing that. Can you see this up here? Okay. So I'm basically kneading it in the bowl, and it's firmer than I expected. So what you're going to see is that over the course of the next hour, when we do this again, it's going to continue to get less shaggy looking. It's going to look more. It's going to stop tearing like this as easily. And really, it just takes a few of these. Go around this a couple of times. You're kind of pulling the bottom over the top, and it shouldn't stick. If it starts to stick, just pull it off fast. Okay, so that's one way of stretching and folding the dough. And the other way is to use a tiny bit of some nonstick spray on your counter. You could use flour, but again, we're incorporating more flour into our recipe and changing it. And this isn't going to have any noticeable effect on the dough. So the other thing that we can do is scrape the dough out. And all we're going to do is kind of stretch it into something like a rectangle. And then, it's a little sticky yet, and we're going to stretch it and fold it over. And then we're going to do the same thing from the other side. Stretch it and fold it over. Stretch it and fold it over. One last one. Stretch it and fold it over, and just put the top now, what was the bottom on the top. We're going to do this again in an hour, and then we're going to repeat that every hour. So I'm going to skip the next one. So in 2 hours, we'll see how the dough's starting to look. It might have started to grow. It may not have grown much at all, but it's really going to feel different. It's not going to feel like it could be torn as easily as this. I'm going to refold this in a second. It's going to be a lot stretchier, and hopefully you'll see that pretty clearly. So at home, do this one more time after an hour, and at 2 hours, and then we'll check in at that point. So it's been 2 hours since 2.5 hours actually, since we originally mixed the dough with the flour and the water and the salt and the starter to make the dough. And this was the original sourdough starter, and this is the new one that we created. So last time I pulled this one out and stretched it on the island, and then this one I had turned in the bowl. So I'm going to do it the opposite, just to make sure that I'm not doing anything too wacky, so that we get different results from each. So you can see that it's really a lot fluffier now than it was before, which is great. There's a lot of air in there, Our sourdough starter is working in our dough. And so we are pushing the bubbles out of this as we do it, so it's going to get smaller. But the big thing that we're doing is we're still forming gluten, and we're reintroducing the wild yeast to the rest of the flour and the recipe. So I'm not going to do this very much. I'm just going to give it a couple whirls like that, and then I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it pretty side up. But you can see, maybe, I hope, that there are some good bubbles in there, and it's really spongy. So we're going to let it sit for 1 more hour, and then we're going to shape it. So this one, I said, we're going to do like we did the other one this time. So we just make it into something of a rectangle or a square, fold over half of it, and then stretch it the other direction too. And that's it. And then this goes back in the bowl, which now I'm going to do a little spritz. And in an hour, we will take these out and we will shape them and set them aside for their final proof, and we'll bake. Okay, so we're back and we're ready to shape our loaves, put them into some bowls to proof. And I'm assuming you don't have rice flour at home and banneton, so we're going to do what I've done the longest, which is to use a kitchen towel, some regular flour, and then put that into a regular bowl, and I'll show you how I typically cover those. So we're going to take one of our dough balls out and put it on this lightly floured island, and I'm going to put it, pretty side down. What's currently the pretty side, and you can see that it's puffed up quite a bit. At this point, we're going to have to start paying attention to when it needs to go into the oven. My camera lady is actually baking right now, so the kitchen is going to be a little warmer, and that means that it might be ready to go in sooner than I was originally planning, and we'll just be ready for that. One of the things that I love about sourdough is that the time frame it's just a little slower, so you don't have to oh my gosh, it's ready to go in the oven, and the oven's not warm, and there's a lot more time for you to say, well, I'm going to give that a little while longer, or I better heat up the oven quicker. So all I'm doing is bringing in the edges of the sourdough like this from the non-floured side, and I'm just kind of tucking them all in together. And it's okay if you knock some of the air out of it. I don't want to mash it and squeeze all the air out, but I'm just kind of pinching it roughly together, and then we're going to tighten it up in just a minute. But I'm going to get the other one out in the meantime. So I'm going to just flour that a tiny bit, and I'm going to flip it, and I'm just going to let it rest here like that. And then we'll just tighten it up, pinch it again, and then go from there. But in order for me to put it in the bowl, I need to ready a towel. And this is, as long as it's not like terry cloth or really rough texture, it should be fine. So I'm going to sprinkle some flour intentionally on this, a lot heavier. And then I'm actually going to rub it in just a little bit, just to make sure that it doesn't stick. So it's a pretty wet dough, and it's definitely going to want to stick. So at this point, you could put bran flakes, or you could put oats or something like that in there if you wanted that for the decoration. But now we're ready to flip this one into there. But in the meantime, let's take this one out. There we go. And kind of gently get it into shape too. So something like that is basically what we're looking for. And now we're just going to set this one aside on some flour so it doesn't stick too much. Okay, with this, there are a whole bunch of tutorials that you can look at on shaping bread and scoring bread and everything like that. I'm not really all that worried about this one, and I'll tell you why. This one that's going into the ceramic bowl with the towel, it's going into the Dutch oven. I'm going to put it ugly side up, and it's going to split along there. The one that is going in the banneton, I'm going to score just so you can see the difference. So this one is going to pop open on its own, and wherever it pops open is great with me. It's going to be really pretty. So, oh, your phone?
Yeah, that's my
Go
bad.
ahead and stop it. All right, so just going to pinch this together one more time. And I'm going to lift it in and kind of gently set it down. It's opened up more than I expected. So I'd like to keep, you know, this pretty flour free. But anyway, it's this side up, and I'm just pinching it. I'll probably check it in a minute, and I'm just going to leave it like that. The one that's going in the banneton, this is rice flour, so I'm just pretty liberally shaking this on the edges, and then even a little more liberally on the bottom. And so this one is going pretty side down, but that looks nice. But it's going to be scored on the top, so I definitely want to make sure that this one's sealed when I put it in. Okay, and this one, on the other hand, I'm just going to put one of those shower caps back on it. These aren't really shower caps. I think if you saw the first video, they come in a little baggie of like a dozen of those or whatever. So we're going to watch this, and at this point it's going to start to grow a lot more quickly than it has so far. And when it's, you know, probably 1.5 times its original size, then we're going to cook this one first in the cast iron pot because I only have one, and then we'll cook this one second. So come back and see that. Okay, so we have the bowl with one of the doughs in it, and I'm going to take out this blazing hot cast iron pot. So this is only about 480 because my oven is not getting to 500. But that's super hot, and so I'm going to take this out and basically just drop it right in. And some of the air will come out, which I would rather not have happen, but it should be pretty good. And you can see it's still even kind of stuck to this. So I'm going to try to be as gentle as possible and peel that off. Should have used more flour or some bran flakes or something. So this is the most difficult part of everything we've done all week, really, is getting that off of there. So put that in and literally just plop it down. And oh, I put it pretty side up. I was intentionally going to put it ugly side up, but since I did, here. So I'm just going to give it this traditional like cross hatching, and I would normally have cut that a little lower, but we're going to cover it with the lid that is still in the oven heating. Camera just stopped, so we're going to leave that in the oven for 15 minutes. I'm going to lower the temperature to 450 right now, and then in 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, we'll take the top off and then let it cook some more so it gets nice and brown on the top. Okay, so it's starting to get a little crowded in here. This is still hot. I just pulled it out of the oven, and we're gonna put the second one in. But there you go. It's a nice looking Artisan loaf. Sounds hollow if you tap it on the bottom, and it registered about 206 when I took the temperature near the center. So I have this on a plate on parchment paper, so that I can try at least to score it a little bit. I'm going to brush off just a little of this rice flour into the sink, or at least off of the top of it with the lawn. But like I said earlier in a different video maybe, you know, you can always brush the rice flour off later. So I'm just going to, what should I do? I should have thought about that before I started. So let's just make a little kind of spirally shape. So I'm trying to score it about, you know, 1/4 inch in or so, and then you can make other little marks. But hopefully it'll open up along that. And I'm going to back up. The cast iron pot isn't really the best place to practice your scoring technique because it all gets jumbled around. But hopefully now I can just lift this into the pot safely. That's another way to do it. And then the lid is still in the oven, staying hot. And if you notice the temperature, I also have that pan in there to kind of keep the bottom of the oven from heating the pot too high. So I did turn the temperature back up, but it still hasn't come up to where it was. So this one's starting, the pot itself is a little cooler than it was for the first loaf, so it'll probably take, I'm going to leave it in for 20 minutes instead of 15 the first time, and maybe 25 with the lid off instead of the 20 that I did for that one. So we'll see how it looks after it's done. Good morning. Yesterday, hi Penny, there's our dog. Yesterday we baked the dough that we put together in the cast iron pot. If you have a like Reset or whatever, you may have done it the same. So interestingly, this is the first loaf that we cooked, and it was started at about 500 degrees, and then I lowered the temperature to 450, uncovered it after 15 minutes and let it go a little longer. This loaf then sat for an extra basically half hour while this one was baking, and this is pretty good. I'd like to see some bigger, more uneven holes. So I would have actually normally let this one rise just a little bit longer before throwing it in, but I didn't want this one to sit around too long. And I have to be honest, I really love this, the way the scoring came out. If you remember, I just made like a kind of a semicircle in this half and then a semicircle in that half, and then same thing on all the quarters, and then just split it a little bit. They're not always pretty. In fact, a lot of times they're really kind of ugly.
That's true.
But I do want to see how this one compares. So now this has been out all night. The other one, this one, I couldn't stop people from eating it for dinner. So we cut it after it had been sitting around for about a half an hour. So more or less the same thing, but I mean, it's a great bake. And if we cut it in different parts, we'd see some other things. So this one, the pot was cooler and it stayed in the pot longer. And so cooking at a cooler temperature for longer is going to give it a slightly thicker crust. The important thing is, after this comes out of the oven, give it a good rest. Don't cut it at least before half an hour. My daughter's rolling her eyes. Because it'll be gummy on the inside, and you really want the moisture to escape. I get the desire to eat warm bread, but let it sit as long as you can. So that's it. The next video that we do is going to be freestanding loaves, the advantages and disadvantages to doing it that way compared to this one. And the other reason we're going to start that today is I want to take some of this to some friends. And it's really easy to take loaves out of the oven with oven mitts, let them cool, stick them into bags, and never actually touch them. So it's a nice safe thing that you can give away at this during this quarantine period that we're in right now. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you have a great bake. If you do, take pictures of it and share it if that's on Facebook or Instagram so we can see it. And if you want to catch the rest of the videos, please subscribe. Thanks.